What do blind people experience whilst on hallucinogenic drugs? An analysis of a case report included a direct quotation from a congenitally blind man. I started taking drugs at a very young age, but the one I felt the most connected with, apart from cannabis, was called Blue Pentagon, basically LSD. Every time I did acid, I experienced something new and spectacular. Obviously through the senses, which are available to me. I never had any visual images come to me. I can't see or imagine what light or dark might look like. With LSD and cannabis though, I experienced so much through my hearing, touch, and emotions that it was already enough for me to take. There was a marked difference between hallucinations and dreaming. On acid, I definitely knew that I was awake, although on unfamiliar territory, not like dreaming. During my psychedelic experiences, whenever I listened to music, I felt as if I was immersed in the most beautiful waterfall ever. The episode of the waterfall was the nearest I ever came to experiencing anything like synesthesia. The music of Bach's Third Brandenburg Concerto brought on the waterfall leaked. I could hear violins playing in my soul, and found myself having a 1 hour long monologue using different tones of voices. I remember they sounded extremely unique. LSD gave everything height. The sounds coming from songs I would normally listen to became three-dimensional, deep and delayed. It seemed that music began coming apart and unraveling. My favorite track began to echo in my mind, as if my brain would hear the music played in the present, but while still hanging on to what I had heard a second before. It was like a tape loop that kept on echoing. This led me to look within, and I became more aware of myself, and the understanding of life, of people, and the music I was listening to. I felt like my brain was overloaded with information and I could not take all of it in at once. On one of my trips, I remembered myself touching a tree on the way to my friend's house. This felt amazing. Just like a tree from the forest or the jungle. Walking that day felt almost as if I wasn't heavy on land, and I was racing at such a tremendous speed that it felt I was actually flying. I love science. Okay, and what will you do with this grant? We are gonna give a blind guy acid rad to the extreme. I've done it once. My only advice is be in an area you can relax in, and around people you can relax around. Also get some orange juice or citrus juice. Oh, and block out a day. I recommend 2 days, 1 day to trip, 1 day to recover. It's not like you can't function the next day, but you certainly won't want to. It's like a hangover, but your mind just feels exhausted, and you don't feel like doing much at all. Also, I highly recommend the following when tripping. Various fruits to eat, have some art supplies set up, have chewing gum, so you don't accidentally grind your teeth, listen to some of your favorite music, and have some fun/trippy videos on a playlist. I really enjoyed nature when I was tripping. Blue sky, green grass, tall trees. Just total awe in the beauty of the natural world, and the sense of my place in that world. 10/10ths would trip with trees again. First time I took shrooms, it was with 2 other guys. College campus. We didn't tell anyone, not for any reason, just noting we hadn't. Anyways, a dude from my friend's dorm walks up to us while we are outside, and he's like, "You guys are tripping hard." We ask how he knew. He said we spent about 5 minutes staring at a shrub. This was like 16 years ago, and I remember that shrub. It was very green. My wife and I haven't had acid in years, but we'll still sporadically point out things that are suspiciously purple to each other. The oversaturation of colors is such a common thread among trips. My girl and I will see something trippy and say to each other, if we were tripping right now, we'd be going nuts. We haven't tripped in a while. I feel like trying acid is something everyone should try, or shrooms. I'd recommend shrooms over acid every time. It opens your mind to things I'd otherwise never get to experience. The one I never forget, my buddy was having a bad trip, and we had heard it helps if you just remind someone their name, give them a pat on the back, and tell them everything is okay. So in my psychedelic stupor I'm repeating this same phrase over and over. Your name is James, everything is okay, and it's working. He starts to chill out a little, but then my little chant just starts to sound funny to me. I suppress my laughter, because I think it's gonna break the magic chant spell, but it's actually filling up in me like a liquid. It's like someone is pouring laughter juice inside me. I feel it rise to my legs, up in my torso, then in my head. Then it starts inflating my face like a water balloon. And then pop. My face explodes and all the laughter bursts out all at once. This terrified poor James, what are you doing? Don't do that. And right back to the bad time hole he went. So I start over with the magic phrase, he is calming down. I feel the juice start to fill me up again. But I'm determined not to explode. Point him fighting the pop, chanting the chant. Your name is James. Everything is okay. Your name is James. Everything is okay. And then our stupid friend Tim comes floating in between us perfectly horizontal like a cartoon, with the biggest shit-eating grin on his stupid face. And in the most bizarre cartoon voice says, my name is Melvin. I burst into a laughter juice supernova, creating a whole new universe where James could just right off. He didn't even live in the Lortiverse anyways, him. I remember that every once in a while and it always makes me laugh. Greatest experience with drugs I've ever had, and one of the best experiences period, was doing acid down by my parents' pond. I did 2 hits of acid and my buddy I've known for 28 years ate a quarter of shrooms. I rolled up a nice fat blunt of some amazing purple haze and we walked down to my folks' pond. It was a beautiful June night in Maryland. The temperature was perfect and the air was moist, but not muggy, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. My parents have 5½ acres of wooded property on a hill, and at the bottom is a retention pond for the neighborhood. The pond looks almost like a big crater, with about a 15 feet wide walking path around the whole thing, surrounded by big trees, and our driveway runs down to it. We got to the pond, and at this point the hallucinogens were starting to kick in. So we sparked up a blunt of this beautiful, stank-a-rank purple weed and laid down on our backs looking up at the stars through the big opening in the trees above us. It was almost too much to take in. The stars were dancing and glistening like diamonds held to the light. Satellites and planes raced across the blackness of the sky, weaving between the stars. Heat lightning lit the sky up with red and blue hues like a strobe light every 10 to 20 seconds. Every once in a while a shooting star would flash across the sky. But the best part of all were the fireflies. All around us in the woods and the sky, thousands of fireflies darted about searching for mates. If you're not familiar with LSD, a common visual hallucination is to see tracers. Basically, if you see a moving light, you will see what appears to be a light streak from its origin point to its new position, almost as if you made a stroke with a marker or something. It's one reason glow sticks are so popular in the rave scene with candy flippers. Now imagine that effect x 1000 little bioluminescent bugs darting through the sky. And of course, we were also serenaded through the experience by hundreds of crickets and frogs and all the other sounds of nature one would expect to hear. Owls, foxes, the rustling leaves from deer walking through the forest. The experience was almost indescribable. It was like Mother Nature decided to pull off a beautiful performance just for me and my friend. Me and my buddy knew this was a special moment even at the time. I remember telling him that this was the best moment of my entire life, and meaning it. I felt more connected to the earth than I ever had before or have since, and felt like everything made sense for the first time in my life. It was so profound that I quit taking hallucinogens afterwards, because I knew I'd never have an experience like that again. 100% agree with you. When I nature tripped, I decided to lay in a hammock and just look up and enjoy the view. It sounds weird, but when I focused on a single tree I pictured being above it and seeing it as a whole. All the branches circling around the tree made it look like a dot. One singular thing. Then I pictured me back further and further and further till I was looking at the world and realized we are all one. We are literally all together on this one planet and living together on this one single planet trying to live and find happiness. I don't want there to be any misconceptions here. The hangover from tryptamine psychedelics is not what most people think of when they hear that word. It's more like you've just been on an incredibly long but exhilarating journey in a faraway land, and you don't want to go straight to work your first day back. You want some time to reflect on the wonderful journey you just took. Enjoy your own bed, hug your dog, cuddle with your cat, drink your own coffee, sit in your favorite chair. You feel tired and maybe overwhelmed by the journey, sure, but you don't feel burnt out or out of sorts. You feel refreshed, enlightened, and at peace. The day after an acid trip isn't a hangover, because hangovers are not beautiful. Also, for first time trippers, don't do it alone. you will feel things you literally cannot describe, and sometimes that can be very uncomfortable. Having someone around that you trust will alleviate anything that happens that's a bit too weird, haha. Psychs are so radically different from other drugs, much more spiritual and wholesome in my experience. If you get the opportunity to trip in the right setting, in nature, with friends, plus good music, it's really an unbelievable experience, and one that I'd recommend to everyone, except for people with family histories of schizophrenia. Question about the come down. How do you know when the trip is over? Do the hallucinations start to slow down and get less weird till you're back to reality? Or do you naturally just sleep street some point and when you wake it's day 2? Do you get a hangover? In my experience it tends to come in waves, and the intensity increases and decreases a few times over the trip. Eventually the visuals and the thought loops stop and everything starts to feel back mundane again. It's usually only after this point I can even think about going to sleep. It's not quite the same feeling as a hangover, you just feel exhausted. During the peak of hallucinations it's much harder to remember that you're high, so when you hallucinate something you so genuinely believe it to be true. For example, last time I convinced myself I owned a dog. I do not, and wish I did. I so thoroughly believed this dog was real that when a piece of paper shifted in my recycling box I 1000% believed it was my dog's nails scraping across the floor as she shifted her weight while sleeping on the kitchen floor. It was so vivid, and in my state it absolutely was my reality, that my dog was in the kitchen. I caught myself nearly calling her over before I remembered I don't own a dog. Then I had a moment of grieving the loss of the dog I never ever owned in the first place, and who never existed. Then I pondered over that interaction, and noticed how similar grief felt to the feeling of disappointment. It was like grief was a roided up version of disappointment. Then I had an epiphany, that all emotions must just be the feeling of various brain chemistries, some just being more potent versions of others, and so of course some emotions must share ingredients as there is a finite amount of brain chemicals. Then I had an epiphany that emotions are a figment of our brains, and yet they are so powerful that they dictate the majority of the actions and decisions we make every day. I know all of this is very deep, but it was extremely entertaining to go down this chain of thoughts at the time. So to answer your question, as you come down the things you hallucinate become easier to distinguish between reality and hallucination. So you might hear a car backfire and your brain's first thought is OMG there is a gang war happening in my neighborhood, but that thought is instantly replaced with no, you live in a safe neighborhood and your city doesn't have a gangbanger issue. It was probably, insert more rational explanation. You aren't as immersed into the hallucinations, you can more easily differentiate them from reality and they aren't as vivid, so they don't send you down an epiphany rabbit hole. Drugs affect everyone differently. It's interesting. I never really properly tripped on LSD with full hallucinations. My brain didn't seem to work like that, even if my friends who took the same batch were off their heads. I would however feel happy and related. The next day I'd be the opposite of drained, energized and happy. One exception is the time a friend and I were sold a research chemical they claimed to be acid. I just knew it was different, and the dealer later admitted as much. I started having minor visuals, but my friend began to completely lose herself. That switched off something in my mind and I went into babysitter mode for 6 hours. Try containing a tripping person who doesn't know who you are while she's prancing around the middle of the street in the Back Bay in Boston at 1 AM. The next day I felt like I had hit by a truck. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.